Stephen Brooks didn't realize his marriage was ending when his wife mentioned another man. He realized it when she looked relieved after saying it. Not guilty, not conflicted, relieved. That was the moment something became very clear to him. People only feel relief when they finally say something they've been thinking about for a long time. Stephen was 39 and built for stability in a way most people only pretend to be. He worked in operations management for a commercial infrastructure firm where his entire job was preventing expensive mistakes before anyone else even knew they were possible. Risk mitigation, process control, contingency planning. His entire professional life existed around one principle. Small problems become disasters when ignored. Ironically, that same principle would soon apply to his marriage. He lived in a mid-sized river city where life moved at a pace that rewarded consistency more than flash. His routine rarely changed. Up before sunrise, coffee in the same mug, work reports before most people opened email, gym 3 evenings a week, weekends scheduled enough to feel intentional but not rigid. He didn't avoid excitement. He just didn't trust things built only on it. Vanessa Clark had always been different. Where Stephen stabilized environments, Vanessa accelerated them. She worked in brand strategy and client development, a field built on momentum, perception, and social intelligence. She could read a room in seconds, could shift tone mid-conversation, could make strangers feel like allies within minutes. She was sharp, magnetic, restless. They had been together almost a decade, married for 5 years. No children, but their lives were otherwise fully merged. Shared investments, shared plans. A modern townhouse in a planned neighborhood where everything looked intentional, and nothing happened unexpectedly. Financially, they were ahead of most couples their age. Emotionally, something had already started drifting. Vanessa had always liked motion. New restaurants, new trips, new conversations. Stephen believed once they built enough long-term security, novelty would become less important. He wasn't wrong about security. He was wrong about her definition of fulfillment. The shift started subtly. Not fights, observations. You plan weekends like project timelines. You ever just do something without calculating the outcome? You know spontaneity isn't a risk category, right? Individually harmless, together directional. The real change started after she reconnected with people from her past online. Old college friends, former colleagues, people who represented earlier versions of herself. Stephen didn't think much about it until the dinner conversation. No warning, no tension. Just a sentence placed carefully into silence. You know what your biggest problem is? Stephen looked up calmly. What? She didn't hesitate. You're too predictable to be exciting. Not too predictable for her. Too predictable to be exciting to anyone. That distinction mattered more than she probably realized. Stephen didn't react emotionally. That seemed to surprise her. What does that mean? He asked. Vanessa leaned back slightly like someone explaining something obvious. Some people actually live, she said. Some people just manage life while watching everyone else take risks. Then she mentioned Julian Hart, a name Stephen hadn't heard in years, someone she dated long before Stephen entered her life. According to her, Julian wasn't stable. He was alive. Stephen asked one question. Are you unhappy? She paused longer than expected. Not unhappy, she said finally. Just unstimulated. That word stayed with him. Unstimulated. Like their marriage was a waiting room instead of a life. She described Stephen as reliable, responsible, safe. None of it sounded like praise. She described Julian differently. Spontaneous, fearless, unrestricted by rules. Stephen listened carefully. Because information always matters more than reactions. At that point, it still sounded theoretical. What he didn't realize was she wasn't describing an idea. She was describing a decision already in motion. After that night, Stephen didn't accuse her, didn't check devices, didn't start emotional confrontations. He asked direct questions instead. Are you talking to him again? That half-second hesitation answered everything. Yes, she admitted. We just reconnected. Casual tone, like reconnecting carried no velocity. How often? Sometimes. Sometimes became most days. Stephen started noticing behavioral tells, smiles at messages, conversations ending when he entered rooms, subtle angles of privacy. When he asked who she was talking to, she gave vague answers. Friends. People who enjoy life. Conversations that don't feel like status reports. One word started appearing repeatedly. Boring, never shouted, just repeated enough to become an identity. One evening, she came home later than planned. She had mentioned drinks with coworkers earlier. That wasn't what happened. When she walked in, she carried a charged energy he hadn't seen in months, like she had stepped into a different current. "How was the work?" Stephen asked. "It didn't work." No hesitation. "I met Julian. Just information." "Why didn't you mention that earlier?" She shrugged. "You would have made it complicated." "I would have wanted transparency." "I don't need permission." "I didn't say permission," Stephen replied. "I said transparency." That distinction irritated her more than the accusation would have. She said he sounded insecure, said he knew he couldn't compete with someone who actually lived boldly. She described Julian like he was a movie character, failed startups, big ideas, risk tolerance. "But at least he tries," she said. "He has stories." "When I'm with him, it feels like something could actually happen," Stephen answered quietly. "Something is always happening." She frowned. "Mortgage equity is happening. Long-term security is happening. Future stability is happening." She laughed, not kindly. "That's the problem," she said. "You think stability is exciting?" Stephen asked one final question. "Are you thinking about leaving?" This time the pause was longer, measured. Then she said, "Maybe I already did." She didn't mean physically, she meant emotionally, and she watched his face carefully, waiting to see if she still had power there. Over the next weeks, comparisons became normal. Julian would have just done it. Julian doesn't overanalyze everything. Julian doesn't live scared. Stephen noticed something important. She never described the results, only impulses. Julian wasn't a person anymore, he was a symbol. Risk without accountability, movement without structure. And Stephen understood something most people understand too late. She wasn't choosing another man. She was choosing a different story about herself. And she was already halfway gone. Stephen understood something important the night Vanessa told him she finally had clarity. Real decisions rarely sound emotional. They sound logical. Justifications. Explanations. Carefully arranged sentences meant to make a choice sound inevitable instead of voluntary. She came home later than usual and sat across from him at the kitchen island like someone about to deliver a performance review. Calm posture, controlled breathing, measured tone, rehearsed. That was the first signal this conversation had already happened somewhere else before it happened here. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. Stephen nodded slightly but didn't interrupt. "I needed to understand what I was missing." That sentence told him more than the rest would. Missing. Like their marriage was an incomplete experience instead of a shared life. "And now I understand," she continued. She said spending time with Julian reminded her what attraction was supposed to feel like. That she hadn't felt that level of chemistry in years. That with him she felt noticed instead of accommodated. Then came the comparison. Predictable, responsible, dependable. Words Stephen once believed described a good partner. The way she said them, they sounded like defects in a product review. Then she repeated the sentence she clearly believed explained everything. "You're just not someone people get excited about." She watched his face carefully, waiting, expecting damage, expecting visible impact she could measure. Tears, anger, defensiveness, negotiation. Something dramatic enough to confirm she still mattered enough to hurt him. Instead, Stephen did something she hadn't prepared for. He stood up, not abruptly, not aggressively, just with quiet certainty. "There's something we should clarify," he said. She frowned slightly. "This property belongs to me. I purchased it before we got married. I'm not going to live with someone who openly says they would rather be with someone else." She blinked slowly, not confused. Recalculating. "If that's what you believe," he continued, "then you should pack what you need tonight." At first she laughed, a short, dismissive laugh. "Wait, you're serious?" "I am." Her posture changed immediately. "You can't just decide that." "I'm not deciding for you," he answered calmly. "You already decided. I'm just refusing to pretend otherwise." That landed harder than anger would have. Her voice sharpened. "That's controlling." Stephen shook his head slightly. "No. Controlling would be trying to stop you. This is the opposite. You're free to go exactly where you've already been going. That sentence changed everything because it removed drama and replaced it with consequence. I haven't officially decided anything, she said. Stephen held her gaze. You just told me I'm not someone worth choosing. Silence filled the space between them. Then he added, I'm not going to compete with another man while you evaluate your options from my home. That was the sentence she wasn't prepared for. You're overreacting, she said. Couples go through phases. This stopped being a phase, Stephen said quietly, when you started describing someone else as an upgrade. No raised voice, no insults, just structural clarity. He walked upstairs, took a travel suitcase from the closet, and placed it near the staircase. You should take what you need, he said. We'll let attorneys handle the rest. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on her face. Shock, then anger, then something closer to fear. This is extreme. No, Stephen said. This is alignment between words and reality. She tried a different angle. I was just being honest. And I'm responding honestly. You're supposed to fight for your marriage. Stephen answered something that stayed with her longer than she expected. I don't fight to be chosen. I step back when I'm not. That was the moment the emotional balance shifted. Within an hour, she had gathered essentials, clothes, laptop, personal items. The things people take when they believe this might still be temporary. At the door, she tried one final attempt to regain leverage. You're going to regret this when you realize you pushed away the only person who chose you. Stephen didn't hesitate. That's a risk I'm comfortable accepting. And then he closed the door. Not loudly, just finally. The silence afterward wasn't painful. It was precise. For the first time in months, there was no tension in the air. No subtle comparisons, no invisible evaluation happening across the dinner table. Just quiet. The next morning, Stephen called an attorney before leaving for work. Not because he was emotional, because clarity should be documented while it's still clean. He explained everything factually. Voluntary departure, premarital ownership, no children, shared accounts needing separation. What should I do immediately? He asked. By the end of the day, he had opened new financial accounts, redirected income deposits, documented shared assets, scheduled formal filing. Structure removes chaos. He believed that more than ever now. Around midday, Vanessa finally texted. Are you seriously filing? No apology, no ownership. Just disbelief consequences were real. Stephen replied once. My attorney will contact yours. Minutes later, she called. He let it ring. Then came a longer message explaining he was escalating unnecessarily, that every marriage hits turbulence, that he was proving her point by being rigid instead of emotional. Stephen didn't respond. He had already answered the only question that mattered. Later that evening, another message arrived. Different tone, less confident. He isn't who I remembered. Stephen read it carefully. Apparently, living with Julian was different than talking about him. Apparently, unpredictability feels different when it affects your sleep schedule. She described intensity, arguments, a life that felt less like excitement and more like instability. Stephen recognized the pattern immediately. The moment uncertainty appeared, she was already checking whether stability was still available. He didn't reply. Instead, he blocked the number. Not from anger, from recognition. He refused to become someone's backup plan after being told he wasn't even first choice. He removed her from shared accounts, changed passwords, restricted access to home systems. From that point forward, communication would exist only through attorneys. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was clean. Nearly 2 months passed without direct contact. Stephen focused on work. Legal steps progressed. His routines returned. Not empty. Stable. Then one evening, a colleague sent him a news link with a simple message. Isn't this the guy? Stephen opened the article. Julian Hart's name was in the headline. Federal investigation. Financial crimes. Multi-state fraud allegations tied to one of his ventures. The article wasn't speculative. It listed dates, transactions, formal charges, not chaos, documentation. Stephen read it twice, then once more. So this was what living on the edge meant. A few days later, another update appeared. Arrest confirmed. Court hearing scheduled. Asset restrictions pending. Stephen didn't reach out. There was nothing to say. His life was already separating legally and emotionally. About a week later, his mother called. careful voice. "Have you heard from Vanessa?" "No," Stephen said. "I cut contact weeks ago." A pause, then, "She came here today." That landed differently than any headline. His parents lived about 40 minutes away. Vanessa hadn't contacted them since the separation. Now she was standing at their door, crying. Not dramatic, not persuasive, just exhausted. According to his mother, she looked smaller somehow, like reality had removed the confidence she left with. She said Julian had been arrested in front of her. Early morning, federal agents. Questions she couldn't answer. She claimed she thought his ventures were aggressive, not illegal. Stephen's mother asked one question. "Why did you come here?" Vanessa answered quietly, "I didn't know where else to go." That detail stayed with Stephen. She had chosen uncertainty over stability, framed him as insufficient. And when uncertainty collapsed, she went to the last place connected to safety, his family. Stephen's father told her something simple. "Stephen has already filed." Apparently, she went completely silent after that, like she expected delay, negotiation, a window. There wasn't one. His mother gave her water, let her sit briefly, treated her kindly but without invitation to stay. After about 20 minutes, she left. And for the first time since everything began, Stephen understood something with absolute clarity. She hadn't realized stability had value until she no longer had access to it. The question Vanessa asked Stephen's parents wasn't really about forgiveness. It was about access. Stephen understood that immediately when his mother told him exactly how the conversation ended. "She asked if you were still angry," his mother said carefully. "And? I told her you weren't angry. You were finished." That distinction mattered. Anger suggests temporary heat. Finishing suggests structural change. "What else did she say?" Stephen asked. His mother hesitated slightly. "She said she made a mistake." Stephen didn't answer right away. Not because the words were complicated, because they were predictable. People often discover clarity after consequences become real. "What kind of mistake?" he asked. His father answered this time. "The kind people only call a mistake after the alternative collapses." That sounded accurate. Vanessa hadn't framed it as a mistake when she believed she was trading up. Only after Julian's situation became public did the narrative change. Stephen asked one more question. "Did she ask to come back?" Another pause. "Yes." "And what did you say?" His father didn't hesitate. "That this isn't our decision." Stephen nodded even though they couldn't see it. His parents had always understood something many families get wrong. Loyalty does not mean interference. That night, Stephen thought about something his attorney had told him early in the process. "Reconciliation attempts usually appear after financial or social pressure," she had said. Not before. At the time, he had thought that sounded cynical. Now, it sounded statistical. 2 days later, Vanessa contacted him through an email address he hadn't blocked. Subject line, "We should talk." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Not, "I hurt you." Just negotiation language. Stephen read the message once, then again more slowly. She wrote that she hadn't understood how serious things were, that she thought he was reacting emotionally, that she didn't realize he would actually file. That sentence stood out most. She didn't realize he would act, meaning she thought his stability included tolerance. She described Julian differently now. Not exciting, unstable, not bold, reckless, not ambitious, careless. The same facts, new interpretation. She said she had been caught up in an idea. That phrasing interested Stephen, because it meant she knew she hadn't been choosing a person. She had been choosing a narrative. She asked if they could meet. Just talk. No pressure. Stephen considered it for less than a minute, then replied with one sentence. "Communication goes through attorneys now." Her reply came fast. "You're really going to end 10 years like this?" Stephen answered with precision. "No, you did. I'm just documenting it." She didn't reply after that. 3 days later, her attorney contacted his. Different tone, more formal. Requesting delay, requesting reconsideration, requesting space for emotional reassessment. Stephen declined everything, not out of resentment, out of pattern recognition. Because he understood something most people only understand after repeating mistakes. When someone shows you what they believe they deserve, you should believe them the first time. About 2 weeks later, Stephen encountered something unexpected. Not from Vanessa, from someone connected to Julian. A former business partner reached out through LinkedIn. Short message. You don't know me, but I think you should know what kind of situation she walked into. Stephen almost ignored it. Then curiosity overrode indifference. They spoke briefly by phone. The man didn't sound vindictive. He sounded tired. He explained Julian's pattern wasn't new. High energy, big promises, short cycles of success followed by collapse. New ventures started before old ones closed. Investors rotated. Stories stayed impressive. Results didn't. He's good at convincing people he's about to win, the man said. Not as good at actually winning. Stephen didn't comment. Then the man added something more telling. He also tends to overlap relationships. That wasn't surprising. What do you mean? Stephen asked anyway. Transitions fast, the man said. Doesn't like empty space between attention sources. Attention sources, not partners. Stephen thanked him and ended the call. Information without emotion is easier to process. That night, Stephen thought about Vanessa's earlier words. With him, something could actually happen. He realized something had happened, just not what she imagined. About a month into the legal process, she tried one more approach. A physical letter, handwritten, not emailed, not texted, delivered through regular mail. Stephen recognized the handwriting immediately. Careful, controlled, slight rightward lean. The letter was different in tone from everything before. No comparisons, no justifications, no mention of Julian. Just regret framed carefully. She wrote that she misunderstood what excitement meant, that she confused unpredictability with depth, that she didn't realize how rare emotional safety actually was. Stephen noticed something important. She described what she lost, not what she did. Loss language, not responsibility language. Near the end, she wrote, I thought I had options. I didn't realize you were the one deciding if I still had one. That was the most honest sentence she had written, because it acknowledged something she hadn't seen before. Choice runs both directions. Stephen didn't respond. Not because he wanted to punish her, because he had nothing to add. His decision wasn't reactive anymore. It was settled. About 6 weeks after separation, something else changed. The emotional weight disappeared. Not dramatically, quietly, like background noise turning off. He noticed it one evening while making dinner. No replaying conversations, no imagined arguments, no wondering what he could have done differently. Just presence. That's when he knew something was truly over. Not when she left. Not when he filed. When he stopped mentally negotiating with the past. A few days later, his attorney called with updates. Vanessa had formally requested spousal support considerations. Stephen wasn't surprised. Not because she was malicious, because she was adjusting to reality. His attorney sounded confident. Premarital ownership, documented voluntary departure, financial independence. The case was structurally simple. Before ending the call, she said something Stephen would remember later. People often confuse stability with weakness, she said, but stability is what allows someone to walk away clean. Stephen understood that now. Stability isn't passive, it's selective. About 2 months in, he ran into a mutual acquaintance at a grocery store. The kind of interaction most people dread after separation. Awkward pauses, careful questions. Instead, the man said something unexpected. I heard what happened. Honestly, I always thought she underestimated you. Stephen raised an eyebrow slightly. How? He thought calm meant soft, the man said. Some people don't realize calm is usually controlled strength. That description felt accurate. Stephen had never been passive. He had simply never needed to prove otherwise. Later that night, Stephen realized something else. Vanessa never actually left because of Julian. Julian was just timing. She left because she believed she could do better. She tried, and reality answered. By the time the court dates were approaching, Stephen no longer thought about winning or losing. Just alignment. Words matching actions. Promises matching behavior. He didn't feel damaged. He felt corrected. And for the first time since everything began, he understood something clearly. Closure isn't something the other person gives you. It's something you build when you stop waiting for them to become who they already showed you they weren't. By the time the divorce reached the financial disclosure phase, Stephen noticed something unexpected. The emotional part had already ended. What remained was logistics, documents, dates, signatures, valuations. The language of separation is rarely emotional. It is procedural. Vanessa looked different the first time he saw her across the mediation table. Not physically weaker, just quieter. Like someone who had spent weeks recalculating reality and didn't like the numbers. There were no dramatic exchanges, no accusations. Just attorneys moving through structured questions. Assets, accounts, ownership timelines. Stephen answered everything factually. No embellishment, no commentary. Vanessa answered more carefully, occasionally asking her attorney to clarify implications before responding. That alone told Stephen something had changed. She was no longer operating from confidence. She was operating from caution. At one point, her attorney attempted to frame the separation as emotionally reactive, suggested Stephen had escalated too quickly. That narrative didn't last long. Stephen's attorney calmly produced dated messages and timeline documentation showing Vanessa had acknowledged pursuing another relationship before he initiated legal steps. Not accusations. Sequence. Sequence matters more than opinions in legal environments. Vanessa didn't argue that point. She just looked down at the table. Later in the session, she spoke directly to Stephen for the first time. Quietly. "You didn't have to make this so final," Stephen answered without hesitation. "You already had." Her eyes tightened slightly. "That's not how I saw it." "That's how you described it." Silence followed. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "I didn't think you were the type to walk away." Stephen considered that carefully before answering. "I'm not the type to stay where I'm being evaluated against replacements." That sentence stayed in the room longer than anything else said that day. The mediation concluded without conflict, because structurally there wasn't much to fight over. The house remained Stephen's. Shared accounts were divided cleanly. Retirement contributions separated. No children simplified everything. At the end, Vanessa lingered slightly as the attorneys packed documents, like she wanted to say something without witnesses. Stephen waited. Eventually, she spoke. "I really did believe I was choosing something better." Stephen nodded once. "I know." That surprised her. "You're not going to ask why?" Stephen answered honestly. "No. Why not?" "Because your reasons already existed before I heard them." That seemed to affect her more than criticism would have. She asked one final question. "Do you hate me?" Stephen answered immediately. "No." That seemed to confuse her. "I expected you would." "Hate requires emotional investment," he said. "I don't have that anymore." She absorbed that slowly. "I never thought I could lose you completely," she admitted. Stephen responded with something she likely understood too late. "You didn't lose me when you left. You lost me when you explained why." That was the closest thing to a closing statement either of them would give. A few weeks later, the divorce finalized without courtroom appearances. No speeches, no confrontations, just legal confirmation of what had already happened emotionally months earlier. Stephen expected to feel something dramatic that day. Relief, victory, sadness. Instead, he felt something simpler. Quiet, not empty, just undisturbed. He changed nothing about his routines. Work remained steady. Gym remained scheduled. Weekends remained intentional. The only difference was absence of tension. About 3 months after everything began, he heard something unexpected through mutual contacts. Vanessa had moved again. Not with Julian. Julian was still dealing with federal charges. Apparently, she had relocated to a smaller apartment closer to downtown. Downsizing. Recalibrating. Stephen didn't investigate further. Her life was no longer his responsibility to understand. What did stay with him was something a colleague said casually over lunch one day. "People think exciting choices lead to exciting lives," the man said. "Usually they just lead to complicated ones." Stephen thought about that later. Vanessa hadn't chosen excitement. She had chosen uncertainty. And uncertainty rarely negotiates kindly. About 6 months after the separation, Stephen received one final message through proper legal channels. Not a request, not a complaint. Just a short note Vanessa had asked her attorney to pass along. It read, "I hope stability finds you someone who understands its value." Stephen read it once, then archived it, because by then he understood something she hadn't understood when it mattered. Stability isn't something you hope someone values. It's something you only offer to people who already do. That realization wasn't bitter. It was clarifying. And clarity, Stephen had learned, is what allows someone to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. The end of Stephen's marriage didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. There was no courtroom confrontation, no emotional speeches, no final argument where someone tried to rewrite history. Just signatures, dates, legal confirmation that something which had already ended emotionally was now finished structurally. 9 years reduced to paperwork. Stephen expected to feel something when he walked out of the attorney's office. Instead, he felt something simpler. Lightness. Not happiness, not sadness, just the absence of pressure. Like carrying a weight long enough that putting it down feels unfamiliar. That night, he did something he hadn't done in months. Nothing. No analysis, no replaying conversations, no wondering if things could have gone differently. Just silence in a clean apartment that finally felt like it belonged entirely to him again. A few weeks later, he ran into Vanessa by accident. Not planned, not dramatic, just timing. A weekday afternoon at a coffee place halfway between their old neighborhood and downtown. She noticed him first. There was a brief hesitation in her body language, like she wasn't sure if she still had the right to approach. Then she walked over. "Hey." Stephen nodded politely. "Hey." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not from tension, from unfamiliarity. They were no longer people with shared plans, just two individuals with shared history. "You look good," she said. Stephen gave a small nod. "So do you." She didn't. Not really, not worse, just different. Quieter, less certain. Like someone who had learned something expensive. "I heard work is going well for you," she said. "It is." Another pause. Then she asked the question people often ask when they are really asking something else. "Are you seeing someone?" Stephen answered honestly. "No." That seemed to surprise her. "I thought you would have moved on already." Stephen shrugged slightly. "I did move on." She understood what he meant a second later. Not replaced, released. She looked down at her coffee. "I didn't understand what I had," she admitted quietly. Stephen didn't answer. Not because he wanted her to suffer, because that sentence no longer required his participation. She tried again. "I thought excitement meant constant intensity." "And now?" She exhaled slowly. "Now I think peace might actually be rarer." Stephen nodded once. "That's usually true." She looked like she wanted to say something else. Maybe an apology, maybe a request, maybe a question about whether anything was still possible. Instead, she said something more honest. "I really thought you would wait." Stephen looked at her carefully. "For what?" "For me to realize." Stephen answered gently but without ambiguity. "I did wait, while we were married." That sentence closed a door without slamming it. She nodded slowly, accepting something she probably already knew. "I hope you find someone who sees what I didn't," she said. Stephen answered without bitterness. "I will." No anger, no revenge, just certainty. They said goodbye without promises to stay in touch, because some chapters only exist to end properly. As Stephen walked back toward his car, he realized something important. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel wronged. He felt aligned. His life hadn't improved because she left. It improved because he refused to stay where he wasn't valued. Later that evening, he got a message from an old colleague inviting him to a small dinner gathering. Nothing formal, just people he respected and hadn't had time to see during the legal process. He went. Not because he was trying to rebuild, because he was already rebuilt. At some point during dinner, someone asked him casually, "So, what did you learn from all of it?" Stephen thought about it for a moment, then answered simply, "That attention is cheap, consistency is rare." The table went quiet for a second. Then someone nodded. "That's true." Stephen didn't add anything else, because the real lesson wasn't about Vanessa. It wasn't about Julian. It wasn't even about marriage. It was about something simpler. When someone shows you they are unsure about choosing you, let them experience what life looks like after they don't. Not as punishment, as clarity. And the strangest part? Stephen didn't feel hardened. He felt more patient. Because now he understood something he hadn't fully understood before. The right person doesn't get bored with stability. The right person builds with it. And for the first time since everything began, Stephen wasn't thinking about what he lost. He was thinking about what he would never again accept. And that felt less like an ending, and more like control.